Well, I'm glad to be here. I mentioned it last night. I've gotten to the place in my career where I only do things for love and money.
For love of money?
Love or money and money. And I'm glad to be here because I love this event. I think it's a fascinating approach to taking a look at tools and trying to really calibrate them in an interesting way. And I love Anna. And I love those chocolate liquor candy things. So there's a lot of love going around. But my title of my talk today is kind of provocative, and it sparked a lot of controversy. So I thought I'd bring that controversy here, and we could have a discussion about it. And I asked the question a couple of weeks ago, although I wrote a post a couple of months ago, actually, on a similar topic called "The Failed Promise of Social Collaboration." So I've been harrowing this field for a while. This is an area of intense interest to me. And so today I'm going to touch upon that. Well, there's me. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm focused on the future of work and work technologies as my primary interest. But I raised the question about social collaboration, and the fundamental thing that I said is, what's wrong with social collaboration tools? And the answer is everything. They're really significantly mismatched. We're in a situation of the sort that Toffler talked about in Future Shock, where he said the anxieties of our time are caused by using old tools for new problems. And that's exactly what we're confronted with. Things have changed so much, and the fundamental premises of a lot of these tools have gone sideways. And so I'm going to actually put up some statistics about that and some charts. This is a very interesting chart. It sets the context for us all thinking about the productivity promise of social tools today. So this is done by an economist, this guy Fernald, and he analyzed a lot of economic data, but basically looking for business sector productivity. And there was an interesting period of time. Well, we have a linear trend over here. The original line from 1973 to 1995 had a slope, as you see, of this degree. And then when the internet occurred, the first generation, Web 1.0, we saw this very steep incline in productivity. It went up significantly to a greater level at 95 through 03. Then Web 2.0 came along, right? And it went back to its historic level. Fernald's conclusion is that the payoff of the internet in that middle period was very high, and companies across the world moved on to that Web 1.0 platform and got big productivity boosts. However, that ceased around this time. Now, you could be an optimist, and I'm a part-time optimist despite the tone of my talk here today, and you could say, well, right around the corner, here in 15, maybe there's another boost of productivity coming. Well, that may be true, but I think it's going to require something different than what we've concocted in the period here from 03 to 13. Some new factor has to come along because, after all, this is, world labor productivity. It's gone back to the old numbers. So this is the period of time where Web 2.0 social collaboration tools, the Web 2.0 era of web collaboration tools, of social collaboration tools, have emerged and have been deployed. And it's not giving the productivity promise that these vendors, these practitioners, these visionaries have hoped for us. It hasn't materialized. And my fundamental thesis is The tools organized to maximize visibility into what all project teams are doing in a company slow things down. They don't increase productivity. They don't increase the momentum and acceleration of work. And so why is that? Well, that's what my talk is about. Why is it that these tools are not apparently doing what they ostensibly are designed to do? I have to watch my clock here. Well, my belief is they're geared around the wrong social scale. Now, what do I mean by social scale? Here's a chart. I stole this from Mary Meeker, who's at Kleiner Perkins now. She came up with this wonderful chart just around the time that I was talking about shifting social scale in social tools, in the workforce. So I lifted her chart, and I'm reusing it here. She made the case that you can analyze what's going on in consumer products that are based around communication by looking at the number of contacts from high to low and the frequency of communication from high to low. And she found two big areas. She found, on the upper left-hand side here, tools that were designed around a high number of contacts but had low frequency of communication, versus this transition to the new generation of consumer apps that are being more widely used today, where there was a lower number of contacts but higher frequency of communication. So this means that people are shifting from large social scale communication to smaller social scale. There's all sorts of reasons why they might do that. But I'm not interested in really talking about consumer products today. I'm talking about what's going on in the workforce. However, the interesting thing is, as we all know, what people do as consumers bleeds into the workforce, bleeds into the workplace. The same kinds of tools that people use every day and find effective in their everyday life, they bring them into the office on their smartphones or their laptops. This is the bring your own mind phenomenon. Bring your own device. I call it bring your own mind, because it's really how people think about the world that they're bringing in. So here's social scale. So the first level of social scale is what I call sets. That is, small networks where all the people in the network know each other. They communicate frequently and reciprocally. So in these small groups, if someone makes a comment, it's not uncommon that everyone in the group would respond to it. This is a small work group or a family, for example. Then there's scenes. Now, a scene is a network of sets. So you think of little circles that are sets, and they're all inside of a larger circle, which is a scene. And in scenes, you get less frequent and an increasing proportion of non-reciprocal communication. So that might be everyone at your headquarters or the entire psychology department at a university. So it may be that you know most or all of the people, but it's a larger group and you interact less frequently, and if you make some comment to that, whatever tools you're using and sharing with those groups, if some number of people don't respond to your comment, it's not a surprise to you. You don't anticipate that everyone is going to respond. And lastly, spheres. These are networks of scenes. So a bigger circle that has scenes in it, and those scenes have sets in them. And here you see sporadic and incomplete communication. This is like the entire company in a multinational, or everyone in Montreal. That kind of scale, very large. Could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. Or all the musicians in New York City, that sort of thing. So the reality is most work that gets done, real work, where you labor and there's a result and it leads to a sale, or a report is written, or a client is satisfied because you handled their problem, That's done at the set or the individual level, people doing their own work, coordinating in small work groups. So for example, there's evidence that shows that the great majority of successful GitHub-based open source projects average about 5 to 7 people. And they get these amazing projects going and started and deployed with very small groups of people. So this is where work really gets done, even if you cobble things together to bigger groups. Much of conventional management is scenic or spheric. It's actually interested in communications of larger groups above the level of sets, like strategic planning, consensus building, culture building, big planning exercises, the corporate budget development project. And I'm making the assertion that in the time of increasing autonomy and agile practice, or praxis, the proportion of scenic and spheric work is decreasing. Middle management, and even some of what senior management does, the amount of that work is decreasing. And you see that decrease most frequently in the highest performing companies. There's a group of companies that perform at the top quartile of their industries, and they have less managerial overhead and more autonomous work going on than people at lower quartiles. We see this all across all industries. So at the same time, we've seen the rise of work chat. Meeker's consumer shift, that we saw the shift from Facebook and Twitter to chat tools. This is being mirrored in the workplace. And social collaboration tools are skewed towards sphere and sphere kinds of applications. They're actually geared around supporting the desires of middle managers, the kind of visibility they support. And work chat is a shift based on what I call contextual conversation. That is, people who are working in sets want to work in the chat kind of environment and have the objects that they're talking about, a customer problem report, a sales lead in Salesforce, a report that is being edited for planning purposes. They want to pull that into the context of where they're chatting and manipulate it there. They don't want to have the experience of going back and forth. They don't want to upload and download files from the cloud to their hard drive. So this, behind the scenes, this is sort of the complement. This is part of the reason that we're seeing a defection from social collaboration tools. So let me say this, that for the analyst firms that track the amount of money that is likely to be made in the next few years from social collaboration type tools, they have consistently, over the last few years, decreased their projections of how much money is going to be made. And some of the companies, some of those analyst firms have gone so far as to cut their projections to 1/3 of what they said it was going to be 5 years ago. And the reason they're making those projections is because people aren't buying the tools. They're not deploying them after they buy them. If they deploy them, the deployments aren't successful. So this is what we're seeing. It's a similar defection. It's just like the movement from Facebook and Twitter, which have decreased in their growth rates, and we've seen this surge of adoption of chat tools on the consumer space, like WhatsApp, and we're seeing a shift to a wide variety of work chat tools. And some of the vendors who have historically been social collaboration vendors are rolling out work chat tools as fast as they possibly can. A great example of that is Jive, who announced their work style family of products, and they rolled the first ones out. They're a client of mine, so I had been talking to them about it last year before they announced. And they saw the handwriting on the wall, and they are moving very quickly to change themselves. But we'll have to see how quickly Can this transition happen? Can they keep up with the market? Can they get ahead of this? And this is something that all companies are going to be confronted with. All the vendors are going to be confronted with this. And that's why adoption is so bad. All right? It's not that the community managers aren't doing their job inside of the companies with these tools, right? It's not that people just don't understand how to use them. They haven't been trained correctly. It's that the problem is that the tools are designed for an idealized company of 5 or 6 or more years ago that may have never existed, but certainly does not exist today. And here's some evidence. This is from the Altimeter Group, and they just recently did some research, a survey of 55 companies with more than 250 employees, and looking at the reality. Forget for a minute these different categories of tools. I'm not sure I exactly know what they mean, but if it was just one bar, and you average this all together, the same results would come jumping out. It doesn't really matter. There's just only a few employees are using these by many. I mean, turn it around. Only a few of these have had use by many employees. Some are by some, no plans to deploy, used by a few. It's just not penetrating. And some of these, like employee advocacy, I'm not even sure exactly what that means. Those numbers are even lower. And this is not like new technology. These are tools that have been around for like 5, 6 years or more in some of them, in some cases. Charlene Lee, who is the head of Altimeter Group, and she published that chart in Harvard Business Review this month, she made the case that she believed that was really going on is that the senior executives of companies involved weren't doing a good enough job to be role models, to themselves use these tools and push them, advocate for them in the companies. But I don't see that coming out of the research. That's just an opinion she has. She's jumping to a conclusion, basically. Although there is some important things that she said about leadership that I'll return to at the end of this talk. But I don't think you can say there's a single point of failure here, and that is that the leaders are failing as role models. I think that's going a bit too far. I think one thing you could suggest is that both the employees and the leaders are finding that these tools don't help them in their jobs very well. So leaders might not be like middle managers, right? Middle managers are the ones that seem most interested in this generation of tools. And I believe that the pace, shape, devices, and organization of business today is so different from when these tools were originally dreamed up that they're dangerously out of date. These social collaboration tools just don't meet today's needs, which are very different. So, in this kind of a setting, what kind of leadership should we expect? Should we hope for? Should we aspire to? Well, leadership is, in these companies, not necessarily restricted to or limited to an elite group of senior executives. In the sort of companies that we're seeing adopting agile and lean techniques of management, we're seeing more of what Laszlo Bock, who's head of people operations at Google, calls emergent leadership. Emergent leadership is simply this, that people in the company at any quote-unquote level, in any role, will step forward to take leadership of a project they're involved in when it's necessary, autonomously. And later on, when that need for them to be a leader recedes or is over, they step down and they go back to being a participant in their other work groups or whatever. And the work of leadership is no longer managing people directly, but deepening culture. That is, trying to create a context in which the company, the people in the company can achieve their goals, get their work done, work together, make headway. So as a result, think about this. If you're spending less time managing people, then your tools don't have to be based around having end-to-end visibility into all the projects of the company. Because actually, every single person has their own notion of where the edge of their work is. There is no one end-to-end. There's as many people as there are in companies, as workers, there are that number of views of what are the important things that I should be in contact with or knowledgeable about. And so fundamentally, this says leadership doesn't have a lot of the flavor of middle management any longer. So I wanted to take a minute and run through some of the characteristics of this deep culture. This was my original keynote that I put aside, but it's important to end with this because the notion that we're involved in a transition from a shallow kind of organizational culture to a richer and deeper one is a way of thinking about the requirements for the tools that we need today, that are the world of work today, not the world of work of 5 years ago. So I'll run through this. Each of these could be a 45-minute presentation. So bear with me that I'm going to hop, skip, and jump through it, but we definitely have some time to talk about that. And during the Q&A debate, whatever that's coming, we can dig into some of these topics. And of course, the fundamental thesis of this keynote. The first is that one of the cornerstones of the old thinking about how business gets done, how work gets done, is that you try to build to consensus. However, the modern theory or research findings about how the best decisions are made in work groups say that you have to base your decision-making around active dissent, the promotion of active dissent in teams, as opposed to attempting to find early consensus, which leads to terrible results, measurably terrible. This is empirical results. This is not an opinion. But we live in a culture, or we live in a society in which businesses still continue to believe that they should stamp out dissent, that you should get everyone thinking about the world in exactly the same way, making the same decisions based on the evidence that's presented. And dissent is, by the way, more likely to come when you promote it, but also when you have diverse people involved in the team decision-making. So it's a real argument for diversity. You have to base work around cooperation rather than collaboration. So if you have the notion that collaboration means, and I'll say this is the way I'm defining it for today, for this purpose, that when a group of people agree to a single goal that they're all going to march toward in their work, and they've achieved a consensus around that, that's a collaborative mindset. A cooperative mindset is that people could be working together for different goals that are largely overlapping or heading in roughly the same direction. But you don't have to stamp out dissent. You can disagree on parts of things, and you could say, I don't agree with it, but Stowe's going to run that piece of it, and I'll do my part. As long as we make it work, that's more important. Creativity rather than tradition, instead of starting from the premise that this is the way we've always done things, instead you say, let's try to find a new, novel, innovative way of tackling this problem. And that requires a very different style of leadership. Autonomous work rather than heteronomy, that is, instead of being told what to do, you're inventing your job, you're inventing your work, you're picking who to work with, How many people here work in organizations where you can choose who you work with and you can say, I'm not working with that guy? Well, you don't, you work alone now.
Not necessarily.
Okay, fine, peace.
No. It's part of the debate in terms of where you're heading.
Okay,
But,
we'll get there. Fast and loose sounds bad, right? Because in English, fast and loose means kind of sketchy, you know? But I kind of like that, down and dirty kind of tinge to this. But fast and loose means you have to weaken social bonds. For example, the nature of the relationship between an employee and their first-line manager at most companies is an extremely strong tie. You have so many things involved. That's the guy who's rating you. He's the one that's going to try to promote you. He's the one that's going to find mentorship for you. He's the one that's going to approve your travel to go somewhere and learn something. And as a result, it's a very tight bond. So you need to deep culture is based on a less friction, less static ties, and much looser. So you might wind up with more connections with people that you're working with in the business, but they're weaker. Now that sounds negative, but strong ties are what slows things down in business or in any social group. So we have to get away from slow and tight. Have to be more agile in decision-making instead of deliberative. That means, a group of people can make a decision. They don't have to ask permission 7 levels up in a hierarchy and get an approval of it. And 6 months have passed, and meanwhile, they didn't get anywhere. Open in public instead of closed in private, so that there's higher visibility, more transparency, an inclination towards publicity instead of privacy. And yes, I coined the term publicity, just like hashtag. I'm hoping it's going to catch on. They published in the Wall Street Journal the other day, so who knows? So it's going to be much more democratic as opposed to oligarchic. The reality is most of us today are still working in businesses where there's an elite at the top, the entrepreneurs of a startup, the senior management team, who believe and continue to operate around the premise that all critically important decisions should be made by them. Other people should be told what the plan is, and if you're living in an empowered organization, then you get a little bit of play in how you actually do your job, but the definition of your job and what the outcomes are and how you're supposed to be measured, that's all done by somebody else.
Sorry, I think this is a quite important point, which refers to your statement about leaders not being an important role model. I think that because many leaders, I've known also my own sector.
Wait a second.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry for intervening. So in my own experience as a change consultant, I've noticed that many C-level managers, in the end, want to retain a level of control. They profess they want to be open, democratic, transparent, but in the end, they always want to decide. And I think that particular element is very important impediment for their aspired role as role model. So in that sense, leaders do play an important role as a role model in democratizing the idea of collaboration.
Stowe, are you cool with questions in between? Because
sure. Well, we're almost done. We're almost
Okay.
done. So, in 2 minutes, I'll be done.
Okay.
But I'll answer this comment or respond to it. For a variety of reasons, I still think there's going to be a lot of companies, even 10, 15 years in the future, that will have C-level executives, right? There is still going to be the notion of some number of leaders who spend the great majority of their time thinking about the future of the business, directing it, blocking and tackling, deciding where investments in the company should be made, and so on. But I believe that even those people will change their thinking and become more of increasingly the orientation will be creating a context in which the great majority of people that work in the business can step forward when it's appropriate and make decisions, take action, start a new initiative, whatever. And in order to be fast, and as fast as the world outside the business, it's inevitable that this will happen. It's only a question of how fast will it happen. Some companies, because of their circumstances or the specific people they have in place as executives today, will probably make this transition a lot faster. And others will make it more slowly. But the half-life of businesses is dropping precipitously. 20 years ago, the average company lasted 30 years or more. And today it's down to 15. And that line is continuing to drop. And there's a reason why companies are going out of business so fast. It's not because they're not executing against the plans they made when they started the business. It's that the world outside is changing so quickly that those plans go out of date and are dangerous to the business. So what we'll see is that in order for companies to adapt more quickly to a changeable world, they have to be fast and loose. They have to have these characteristics. And that ultimately means everyone in the company has to change their own behavior. And yes, senior executives will be role models for that. In fact, it can't happen unless they adopt it. It's essential that they adopt it, but it's not sufficient. If they adopt it in part, they could still run out of gas and die. So it requires all of these things, right? And as, again, emergent leadership, not elite leadership, while there will still be some people who are more equal than others, if you will, there'll be less of them, and they'll be spending more of their time trying to make sure that people are getting more opportunities for growth, that the mentoring program of the company is up and running, that there's a concerted effort to remain, to create a context where people can be deeply engaged in their own work and the work they're doing for the company. So ultimately, the idea behind this deep culture, this transition to deep culture, is we have to be working in businesses where the people doing the work are as important as the work itself. It has to become human-centered as opposed to company-centered. The company has to go sort of through a Maslow transcendence of self. We have to transcend the notion of the company and realize that the purpose of this is, yes, let's make money, let's satisfy our customers, but we must also make a place where people can find fulfillment and purpose in their work every day. Now, for that to be the case, this is a shopping list in a sense when you think about it relative to tools. But smart companies who are trying to build tools to help businesses do their jobs better, do their thing better, make more money, be more productive, satisfy customer demand, make the employees happy, these are, in a sense, a shopping list that become requirements for a new generation of tools. And these are going to be very, very different than the tools that we have become very accustomed to based around the design metaphors of social collaboration. They will be a radical departure from what we are used to. And I hope that I'll see at another Social Now a new crop of tools that will have a new take and will satisfy the implicit requirements in this list.